So what kind of advice would we give her? Well, we wouldn't make a big deal about the fact that actually she scored a 1, because as I said before, if you only use one eye,
You're looking
it
at
can be much more difficult. Right? Her score could probably actually be a 5, but she got a 1 because of that challenge. So we wouldn't trust it in the same way. If she scored a 4, we might look at that 4 and say, okay, well, we can track that over time because there's room to go up or down, and we might want to see if she goes down to a 2 one day or a 1, we go, something's changed. And bring that to the optometrist's attention so they can maybe do an OCT and look a bit deeper into what's going on with the retina. If she goes up, because we got her on supplements, we could take that 4 maybe up to a 6 or a 7. But she may never hit a 10 because she's only going to be using one eye. So different scores mean different things for different people. Right? That's the important thing. We have to put it in context. It's not just one number. All right, so let's carry on then. So we're now at the point where we're going to talk about giving advice to patients. And so this really is the advisor's role. So this is where you're going to pass that information on probably to the eye doctor, the optometrist. And they're going to be putting this in the context of the health of the eye. And so when the test is done, depending on how it works, I think here you're probably going to pass that on to the eye doctor, and they're going to say something along the line like, you scored a bit low today, which means that your eye's natural protection against sunlight and harmful violet blue light is on the low side. It's not a problem. It's a bit like having fair skin or low pigmentation in your skin. People with fair skin need to be more careful when they're in the sun, from UV sunlight. They're more greater risk of skin cancer. It's the same thing in the case of the eye. These protective pigments are in your eyes. If they're low, you should take extra precautions like wearing a hat and sunglasses if you look at boosting those levels. So you come up with your own thing that you want to say, but you put it in the context of sort of the health, the overall health of the eye, and the long-term concerns. This isn't a concern for tomorrow, right? If you scored a 1 today, your eyes are not going to fall out tomorrow. It's important. We have, as a company, we have lots of information. So we, as a scientist, I like to summarize all the literature. So I've got all sorts of documents that I can share with you guys on the dangers of blue light, the importance of macular pigments, how the machine works, putting it into context. If you follow me on social media, particularly on LinkedIn, I'm constantly posting things about the latest research in this space. And that's fuel for you guys to sort of add more conversations with your patients that want to know more about why macular pigment's important. And I'll share some of those with you guys later. Using the patient leaflet's a really great way to transfer that information from the person who's done the testing to the eye doctor. So you guys can figure out how you want that to work. Whether you want to write something completely different, whether you want to use the template we've given you, but some way you want to get some of that information, the demographics and the score, to the eye doctor so they can use that to make a good recommendation. Oh, and then, so as I say, you're just sort of ticking off, so you're going to tick off the various different things, possibly that's one way to do it, and then the eye doctor might tick off sort of, well, I'd recommend sunglasses, and then that goes on to the next person's dispenser's role. Why is it? What's the relationship here? What are we looking at with this? So macular pigments are a link to diet, and they're a link to age-related macular degeneration. So we know that because macular pigments act as antioxidants, along with omega fatty acids. A change in these things can reduce or change your risk of age-related macular degeneration between 40 and 200%. So we know that diet's a very strong link to age-related macular degeneration. In fact, the recent AREDS study, so AREDS is the formula that was used in a very large US study where they looked at, and it's not a great study because they only looked at people, the average age was I think 75. So they took 75-year-olds, they did this for thousands of people at multi-institutions, and they gave them a macular pigment supplement, and they looked at what happened over the next 5 years. Now, that's not a great study because these people are already 75. So what we haven't done is take into account for what they've done for the previous 75 years of their life, right? We have no idea what their macular pigments were, we have no idea what their behavior was, whether they were smoking, all those things. None of that was taken into account in the first instance. So that's a challenge. But even with that 75-year-old average, over 5 years, they saw a significant improvement. In other words, less likelihood of developing age-related macular degeneration if they took the supplements. So it can work. What they didn't see was that it didn't change their risk of getting the disease in the first place. So it changed their risk of progression, but not whether they got it or not. And that's, of course, because we didn't look at the previous 75 years. So a lot of people have looked at that study and they've taken that out of context and said, oh, see, macular pigments don't prevent AMD. They only slow it down once you get it. But what I'm telling you is actually they didn't check that. That's not the question they asked in that study. What they asked in that study is if you're at 75 years of age, can it make a difference? Well, it's like putting a Band-Aid on for a broken leg. Is it going to make a difference in a broken leg? No, it's not, right? So giving somebody macular pigments at the age of 75 is not going to change the likelihood of getting the disease, because that's already happened. They've already done all that damage for all those years. So it wasn't the right study. If you want to do that study, you need to start studying when they're kids at a very young age, see what their macular pigments are, and then follow them until they get to 75. Now, I'm a researcher. We get our funding in 5-year blocks typically, if we're lucky. Usually it's 3-year blocks. It would be really hard for me to do a study today like that, where I would follow kids from the age of 5 to 75, because I'm not going to be around when they're 75 for starters. I can't get the funding to do it. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why that study hasn't been done. But what has been done is some lovely research where they've looked at epidemiology, where they look at people and say, okay, do you remember what you used to eat as a kid? Do you remember how much time you spent outside in the summer? And they try to piece it together going backwards. And that's epidemiology. And those studies have been very clear in showing that actually macular pigments and sunlight exposure are very strongly linked to your risk of AMD. The problem is that in our modern day healthcare system, we like to have double-blind, placebo-controlled studies to prove something is real. And we simply can't do that study on this particular problem because it's an age-related problem. So that, as I said, is a 75-year study that will never happen, unfortunately. So we have to decide, are we willing to go with the epidemiological studies and the evidence we have of last-minute protection, and then extrapolate that and say, yeah, actually we think the best thing for our patients there is have good macular pigments all the way through life, put in protection. That would be my option. That's what I would choose to do. The healthcare systems would say, there's not enough evidence, sorry, we're not going to back that. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. That's just the way that the system works. Okay, so put that in context.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If one patient is diabetic, that going mess up the numbers too, or no?
There is a link. Yeah, so there's a bunch of things that happen with that. So diabetes is often linked to body mass as well. And I was saying earlier that one of the things that happens, so the way that we would naturally get macular pigments is from certain foods we eat in different times of the year, and they would become ripe, say in late summer. All these kale and stuff we'd be eating them naturally. When you eat them, your body goes, oh, look at that. There's lots of this stuff right now. Great, that's fantastic. I'm going to take some of that, put a little bit in your eyes, but the rest I'm going to store in your body fat. And then come winter or the season when that food is no longer available, I'll release that from your body fat back into your system again. Your eye can use it. Our body's been designed to do that for 25 million years. So it's really good at doing that. But nowadays, we can go to the grocery store and get these foods anytime we like. And we no longer lose our body fat in an annual cycle. And because of that, we're not releasing those pigments back into our system again. And so our body is not necessarily getting them. So if you're accumulating body fat, then you're adding those pigments to your body fat and not your eyes. So we do see a link often between diabetes and macular pigment scores because of that. It's a tricky one. All right, fitness has been shown to decrease your biological age. So someone that's really, really active, essentially you can't get younger, but your body acts like it's younger. Your relative age is lower because all the things that you need to be healthy are in prime condition. And it's been shown that it also increases or decreases inflammation and increases the antioxidant activity. So in other words, you might have the same level of macular pigments, but they're more effective because they're getting to the point where they need to be getting to at the time when we need them most. And this can affect your risk of AMD by 70%, so high activity levels. Obesity is, again, as we said, for this very reason, the conversation we just had, it's linked to accessibility of macular pigments. So that is an implication. It changes your risk of AMD by 75 to 235%, so it's one of the biggest indicators for disease on this one. Light exposure, again, is really high. So exposure to violet blue light causes oxidative or photochemical damage. I could talk to you for hours on blue light, and you probably all heard about it, and there's been a lot of debate about blue light, because people often think that blue light is just stuff that comes from computers and screens. It's not true. Most of the blue light comes from the sun, right? Any light source that's white has blue in it. Do you guys know how you see color? You've got 3 color sensors, right? Red, green, and a blue. That's all you have. So you can see millions of colors with 3 sensors. And so when you look at sunlight that looks white, or these lights that look white, all they actually have to produce is red, green, and blue light. And you would see it as white. Your eye would fool yourself into thinking that's a full spectrum light. You've seen the spectrum of light when you see a rainbow. A rainbow is taking the white light from the sun, and through the little raindrops, it's spreading out like a prism. You've sometimes seen those, like the cover of Pink Floyd's dark side of the moon has a prism on the front, and it breaks the light up into the different colors. Well, those colors are white light divided up into the different wavelengths. And so different parts of the energy spectrum have different amounts of energy. We all know that ultraviolet light is dangerous. Well, it's at the short wavelength end of the spectrum, right beside X-rays, right? These are dangerous things. That's why we put lead bibs on. Well, violet blue light is the next part up. You've got ultraviolet, then violet, then blue, then green, then yellow, orange, and red, and then infrared. We know that the short end of the spectrum has high energy. It's a little bit more dangerous. We put sun cream on to protect ourselves from UV. Turns out that actually the violet blue gets through the sun cream, and the basal cell carcinoma that's so common is we're now believing that it's probably come from the violet blue light, not the UV at all. So some companies are now making a violet blue sunscreen that protects you as well. So there's lots of different things there. The other end of the spectrum, the red end, is really good for you. Turns out that if you put fruit flies under red light, the average length of life is longer. If you put them under blue light, they don't live as long compared to white light. So we know that the red light's good for you because it activates melatonin in your mitochondrial system, and that is a really healthy thing to have. It's an antioxidant. So lots of things we could talk about. I could go off for ages on this tangent, but blue light's bad. It is bad. There's still a lot of debate out there, but that's partly again because they can't do these controlled studies that they want to do. But I will talk about one that's happened recently. It affects your risk of AMD by 40 to 370% exposure to blue light. Smoking, again, really high risk factor for AMD. We all know that. Again, it's because it's producing free radicals, these oxidative damage, and macular pigments are antioxidants. So if you smoke, you will tend to see smokers will often have, on average, a lower score on the MPI because they're using up their macular pigments, fighting those oxidative damage. So here's one of these studies. So this is one I just posted up on LinkedIn recently. A great study by Acheron et al. Came out in 2024, just like a couple days ago, actually. And what they did was, this is sort of, we're talking about this epidemiological study. They looked at patients that had intraocular lenses inserted. So their lens had got opaque through cataract. They put a fake lens in there, and they chose either a clear or a blue light filtering one, so yellow light filtering one. The clear ones don't make sense. You're taking a natural lens which is yellow and you're putting a clear one in. And the reason the ophthalmologists like to do that is because people go, oh, the colors are so bright again. Oh, this is great. Because you basically give them the lens like they have when they were a baby, essentially. Mm-hmm. But by the time you're 20 or 30, your lens has already started to yellow, and it just gets more and more yellow through your age. Which is why, by the way, older people tend to wear blue and mauve and purple and dye their hair purple, because their lens is turning yellow, so everything looks kind of like tea-stained in yellow. But blue things still look quite white. And so they all wear blue because it's like, oh, that looks bright and fresh and clean. Whereas anything that looks yellow and orange looks kind of dirty and orange to them. So that's why they dye their hair purple, just so you know. So in this study, what they showed was that people that had yellow filters had a 40% reduction in the progression of the age-related macular degeneration in their retina. So this is a really clear evidence that blue light's dangerous, because the only difference between these two groups of patients was that one had a clear lens and one had a blue filtering lens. So you can imagine that's only a short period of time. That was done over 8 years, and they saw a measurable difference in the progression of the disease in the eye. Imagine what you could do if you had good macular pigments your whole life. You could actually stop that disease from happening in the first place, which is amazing. Yeah?
So, and I don't know if you have the answer to my question, but do you see in European nations, with like this research that comes out, do the doctors actually do implants with more of the blue light filter IOLs versus the clears? Except my assumption is here in the US they probably do more clears.
Clear.
The IOLs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come off. Our main clinic here. Sika's been using blue IOLs for 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so it varies between, so I can only talk to the UK. I know that in some countries, like this research I think was done in Denmark, and they were doing almost 50-50, but not for any particular reason. It was just like, okay, well, we've got different ones, we have different options, put them out there, and then they used that as a study because it was done haphazardly. In the UK, we have different trusts, they call them trusts, so they're health trusts, and they each operate individually, and some of them will only use blue filter, and some of them will not even touch the blue filter, and they can make up their mind themselves. It's crazy. To me, it's mind-boggling. If they come up with the yellow one in the first place, someone would have said, wait a second, you want to make a clear one? Why would you put a clear one in? That doesn't make any sense. But when they first developed them, they developed clear ones, and that was just the go-to supply. And then making yellow was like, well, why would you change it to yellow? Because that's what the eye is already, because it protects you, because there's all these reasons you should do it. So it's not clear yet. And again, ophthalmologists don't keep up with the literature as well as they should, and it takes a long time to integrate the literature into practice.
So Seeker uses them, but they don't tell the patient about it. It's just a silent sort of feature of what they do. So your patients won't know.
It's a bit like you guys don't necessarily tell your patient which brand of lenses you put in their glasses. That's not the important part. They don't need to know that it's a Seiko or a Azul Exotica or some other brand. They just need to know that they do the job. It's a bit like that. That's the way ophthalmologists treat it. Ophthalmologists are too afraid to even tell them that there's a choice, because what if they come back later and they find out some paper there, so they just do it. So yeah, it's a crazy world. It seems really obvious looking at it from the outside, but from the inside it's a lot harder. So as I said, I'm putting up social media posts all the time. This is what I wanted to show you because this is around blue light filtering. And in particular, we had made these measurements across thousands of people in the UK, showing that people that scored, that regularly wore their sunglasses scored higher on average in the MPI. So they're scoring an average of about 4.2, and people that only occasionally wear their sunglasses or blue light filtering lenses scored about a 3.8%. And that's because this bad light, called the ISO blue light hazard function, which has been well put together, that light gets through to the retina. But if you wear a pair of sunglasses, you can reduce that by a lot. So you can see how much reduction there is there from that bad blue light. You can block it by like 98%. So it's really effective to wear sunglasses and block blue light. We'll talk about foods, so it's another thing that eye doctors can talk about, what kind of foods you could be eating. As I said, corn tortillas, I'm really happy that's high on the list, because I love having nachos once a week. And actually it's interesting because it's really important. When you take lutein zeaxanthin, they are lipophilic, they're oil based, they need to be attached to oils. So you shouldn't eat like kale on its own, just green out of the garden. You should eat it with some olive oil or some kind of oil. It helps get it through your system. Corn tortilla chips have corn oil in them, so they already have the oil as well. So they deliver lutein really, really well, actually. I wouldn't recommend your patients go and eat corn chips all the time, but it's not a bad thing. But kale, parsley, spinach, red pepper, orange pepper, these things are all really high, really healthy, really good for you. People talk about eggs. You can see eggs are way down the list, actually. Carrots have almost nothing at all. People talk about carrots are good for your eyes. Yeah, they have vitamin A, which is what you need to see, but most of us have tons of vitamin A, way more than we need. We don't use it up in the same way. So most Western people, vitamin A, carrots are not required. It's really only in African countries where they're not getting any vitamin A at all that they need to have a supplement. We don't need it generally. You get it in your milk, you get it everywhere. So it's plentiful. So carrots really aren't the wonder drug for eyes. So we're now going to talk a little bit about this. Oh, any questions on that stuff? So there's lots more information that I can share with Brian and Dr. Kite and Dr. Ramos, some of the sort of the core science behind that I've simplified to digest. But if you have any questions, by all means, I'm happy to answer them now or share them later. Yeah?
You said you're on social media. Are you going to show us like what your page is on wherever you are on social media?
I'm really mostly just on LinkedIn. So you just search for my name on LinkedIn and you find me there. The other stuff, the other ones I just can't get into. All my family are there. I just haven't got time. I work 2 jobs. So I work full time at the university 9 to 5. I do this on the side. So my evenings, mornings, and weekends are spent running my company, building machines, and then I'm also a professor at another university where I write papers and do research. So I don't have a lot of time for social media. So sorry. You won't find me on the more easily accessible ones. Any other questions about the science behind that? All right.